The fantasy football season has flown by. I don't know how we are 1 week away from the playoffs. Pretty crazy. Gonna miss these videos with you guys, engaging, interacting with all of you, but we are here to get you ready to make a deep run in the fantasy football playoffs to win the ultimate goal, which is a fantasy football championship. And today we're talking about 10 plus players that you need to be adding before week 14 of fantasy football, starting with my number one pickup of the week, and it's Mike Evans, who is going to be returning soon, coming off that broken collarbone that he suffered in week 7. I'd be checking your waivers because there's a chance someone dropped him in your league thinking that there was no way he would be back this year, but he's absolutely going to return. It might not be this week. It could be week 15 or week 16. But if you can get Mike Evans on your roster in the fantasy football playoffs and throw him in your flex, that would be huge. Granted, Evans hasn't looked great this year. In his 3 healthy games, he looked okay. But at the end of the day, he's still Mike Evans. We know he dealt with a hamstring injury as well this season. He's had a lot of injuries, but he's still a guy that's going to have a massive role on this Tampa Bay offense down the stretch. Emeka Egbuka kind of has disappeared over the last month. Chris Godwin is just kind of working his way back from injury. Again, it's no lock that he returns this week, but stash him at the bottom of your bench now and just think about being able to throw Mike Evans into your second flex spot the first week of the fantasy playoffs. How sick would that be? Granted, there is some risk there. It depends on who you're starting him over, but he's Mike Evans. He's on a good offense. He's going to be heavily involved. I would be running to the waivers if he's somehow available in your league. All right, moving on to our next guy, Chuba Hubbard, who is another guy that's highly rostered, around 50% of sleeper leagues right now. But we have to mention him after what he just did last week. He's a guy who's trending up and needs to be added if he is somehow available in your league. We know he's been dealing with that nagging calf injury for what feels like a good chunk of the year, but he looked very healthy in week 13. He also came out in a recent interview and said that this is the best that he's felt in a long time. And let's not forget, this is a player that the Panthers signed to a massive deal last year, 4-year, $33 million contract extension. And as good as Rico Dowdle has been this year, they're still going to use Hubbard, who did outsnap Dowdle 38-27 on Sunday. And let's be honest, Hubbard looked like the much better back in that game. He racked up 124 total yards and scored a touchdown on 19 touches versus the Rams. And the Panthers kind of were using Hubbard in a workhorse role on Sunday. They were using him on early down situations, short yardage, goal line situations, and third downs. If Hubbard is going to see that type of role, that type of usage going forward, then yeah, he's a must-add player if he's available this week. And he's also been pretty efficient on the ground over the last month. He just needed more work. And now that he's finally fully healthy, it looks like the Panthers are feeding him the football. Dowdle obviously is still going to be involved, but Hubbard will have a role going forward. So if you absolutely need a running back on your roster, he is a must-add. All right, moving on to our next player, Chris Rodriguez Jr., who is the starting running back on the Commanders at this point. Over the last 3 weeks, he has been the guy in this backfield. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, a.k.a. Bill, is pretty much just gone at this point. It's going to be the Rodriguez show moving forward, and he's been serviceable for fantasy despite some tough matchups against really good run defenses as of late. But Rodriguez has scored 3 touchdowns in his last 4 games, and he's on an offense that hasn't been that great under Marcus Mariota. But if they get Jaden Daniels back, potentially this week or even next week, that would be a massive boost for everyone on this offense, and it's going to result in more red zone opportunities, scoring opportunities. But this pickup for me is more about the fantasy football playoffs than anything, as Chris has a very favorable schedule from week 15 on. He gets the Giants, the Eagles, and then the Cowboys in the fantasy football championship. All 3 of those defenses don't scare you whatsoever. I really like Rodriguez as a player. I think he has a lot of juice. I think he's hard to bring down. I think he has very nice upside going forward. If you really need a running back, he's another player that I would be adding. And if Jaden Daniels does return some point this season, he could be a league winner down the stretch. All right, moving on to our next guy, Adonai Mitchell. We know it was the John Mechie show in week 12 for the Jets, but last week, AD had his best game since being traded to New York. 8 receptions, 102 yards, found the end zone, 12 targets, 24.2 fantasy points, 98% route participation. The Jets continue to run Mitchell as the X receiver on this offense, and he's sporting a 31% target share over the last 3 weeks, which is the 8th best among receivers over that stretch. We know with Mitchell, he is an extremely talented player. He was kind of in a bad situation with the Colts. It's probably for the best that they traded him away because I think he's going to have a lot of success in New York. He's a former second-round pick, and this is only his second season in the NFL. He hasn't even come close to his full potential. I think he's going to be the focal point of this Jets passing attack the rest of the way. It's pretty evident that he's starting to build a nice rapport, nice connection with Tyrod Taylor, who is going to be the QB1 for the rest of the season. These are the type of players that you want to put your chips on, that you want to bet on down the stretch. These are the type of guys who kind of come out of nowhere and quietly win people fantasy football leagues. And Mitchell's playoff schedule is also very nice as he gets the Jacksonville Jaguars in Week 15 and the Saints in Week 16. Those are both very favorable matchups for receivers. I would be adding Mitchell now before he completely breaks out, and then it's going to be a lot more difficult to get him on your roster. All right, moving on to our next guy, Jaden Higgins, who's only seen his role continue to grow for the Texans on offense. He was second in snaps and routes behind only Nico Collins in Week 13, and now is back-to-back top 24 weekly finishes at the position, along with 7+ targets in 3 out of his last 4 games, 4+ receptions in 4 straight games. Higgins has also seen his target share and targets per route run jump drastically over the last 3 weeks. It was nice seeing the rookie put together a strong performance last week. 5 receptions, 65 yards, which was a career high, 5 targets, and that was all with CJ Stroud back under center. This is another young, talented player. He's a big-bodied receiver sitting at 6'4", 215. That could be a league winner down the stretch if Houston decides to just put him in a full-time role. I don't know what they're waiting for. Higgins is a dog. They spent a second-round pick on this man. Like, give him a massive role on this offense and watch him eat down the stretch. I'm really excited about Higgins. He absolutely needs to be added onto your team. All right, moving on to our next guy, Brenton Strange, who returned to a full-time role for the Jaguars in Week 13, 81% route participation. He saw 53 snaps, which was second most behind only Jacoby Myers. He finished with 3 catches for 45 yards, a touchdown on 4 targets, 13.5 fantasy points, and Strange has scored double-digit fantasy points in each of his last 2 games since returning from injury. It's pretty clear, it's pretty obvious at this point that Strange is one of Trevor Lawrence's favorite targets. He's a very reliable player, especially in the middle of the field for T-Law, as he sports an 88% catch rate and a 16% target share since Week 12. And Brenton has also finished inside the top 7 in weekly tight end scoring in 3 of his 6 healthy games this year. This is an ascending player who appears to be a big part of what Jacksonville wants to do on offense. He is a must-add for me this week, especially if you need a tight end. I feel like the tight end position has not been great at all this year. I think Strange is going to be one of those guys that is going to be consistent the rest of the way, and he has a very nice matchup in Week 14 against the Colts, who are allowing the 2nd most receiving yards and 4th most fantasy points per game to tight ends this season. And if you make it to the Fantasy Football Championship in Week 17, he gets the Colts again. So yeah, go get Strange on your roster. All right, moving on to our next section of the video, we need to talk about stashing handcuff running backs. These are my top 3 stashes at the running back position. This is the time of the year where if you're not stashing these elite handcuffs, then what are you doing? Because if the starter gets hurt, if Christian McCaffrey goes down, if Bijan Robinson goes down, if Kyron Williams goes down, we know Kyron's a little bit banged up, Brian Robinson Jr. would be a league winner, Tyler Algier would be a league winner, and Blake Corum would be a league winner. If you have room, get these guys at the bottom of your bench now, because we all know how talented they are. We all know what they can do in limited roles. Imagine what would happen if they were in a full-time role. All right, moving on to some other strong ads who I really like, who I think you should be adding if you have room. Pat Bryant for the Broncos, who looked like the wide receiver 2 on Sunday night. He had more routes run than Troy Franklin, which was kind of surprising to me. disappointing because we did have Franklin on the start list, but what are you going to do? We are big fans of Pat Bryant. I think his role is going to continue to grow. Down the stretch for Denver, Jordan Mason, just in case Aaron Jones, who suffered that shoulder injury, I know he's day-to-day, but if he doesn't go, Jordan Mason would be the starter. Jaden Reed for the Packers, he's eventually going to come back. I don't know if it's this week, I don't know if it's next week, but he would be a big part of that passing game in Green Bay. Keaton Mitchell for the Ravens. Justice Hill is now out with a neck injury. He's done for the fantasy season. Maybe he comes back in the playoffs for the Ravens. But for fantasy purposes, Mitchell is likely going to be the running back too. Bam Knight for the Cardinals. We don't know what's going on with Trey Benson. Like, he was practicing, then he stopped practicing. We haven't really heard much. So Bam Knight could be the starter for the foreseeable future. Devin Neal, who also let us down for the Saints. He's the starter probably the rest of the way. He didn't come through for us last week, but he still is a guy who I think is very talented, who has a very easy schedule. The issue is just the nature of that Saints offense. They can move the football. I think Neal can still eat. Darren Waller for the Dolphins, if you need a tight end, another guy who has a nose for the end zone and is going to have those big blow-up games. They're going to be hard to predict when they happen, but I still do like Waller. And then John Mechie for the Jets. I think he's going to have big games as well. It's not just going to be A.D. Mitchell. If you need a high upside receiver, look for Mechie. Add him to your team if you have room. That's all I have for you guys today. I really appreciate each and every one of you watching the video. If you like the video, consider leaving a like, subscribe to the channel, comment down below, and I'll see you in the next one.